Kia ora, Legionnaires, Rycon here, and welcome to the recap of the Rycon Cataclysm Universe. There have been many years of Cataclysm on this channel and on the Rycon Roleplay's channel. And so in today's episode, I'm going to be going over the lore, the characters, and how everything has fit together so far, so that you don't have to have watched every series to know what's going on. And to be real, you don't even need to watch this episode. You can jump into the most recent season 3 of Dusk's Tale, and pick things up just fine. Occasionally there will be references to things in the past, and there is an overarching story that is being told, but at the end of the day, if you're just there for the good cataclysmic action and whatnot, you'll do just fine. And so, where then do we begin? I'm going to be going over these in the order of the series and not necessarily chronologically when they take place in the timeline, but we'll go over that. For the most part, they are happening simultaneously, or they are happening one after the other. So, the very first Cataclysm series on the channel, and the first one that we're going to be covering here, which is running in the background, is Noah's Tale, which began all the way back in 2015. This series followed the police officer Noah Hedges as she attempted to survive in the Cataclysm. Cataclysm back then was a very, very different game, as was my understanding of it as well, which of course is always in shifting, changing, and evolving as the game does as well. Noah's goal, as with a lot of our survivors, is just to survive. She didn't have the luxury of having a big goal to work towards, because she had giant hordes of undead to contend with. The early Cataclysm, both in a version sense and a time sense, was very, very dangerous. In the end, Noah was with us for 43 episodes, and in those episodes she goes from a competent officer of the law to an incredible badass who wielded a Nodachi with great proficiency, mowing down the dead like fields of wheat. Yet it doesn't matter how badass you are in the Cataclysm, eventually death catches up with you. And for Noah, that death came in the form of a corrosive zombie, a very lucky corrosive zombie, as after fighting horde after horde, she had broken both of her arms, or they were damaged to the point where she couldn't use them properly. Yet she was still able to hold on to that Nodachi. She was still able to swing it around, using the momentum of her body to create some form of force. But corrosive zombies spill acid from their body as they are sliced, as they're diced, and Noah had no way out. No way to escape this thing. She managed to kill the undead that was trying to end her, but in the process, her wounds were too many. Her fight was lost. And so there, on a rainy day, our very first survivor, Noah Hedges, passed away. Which leads us to our second Cataclysm series, following Elliot the Wendigo Wood, first airing in June of 2016. Elliot was a cannibalistic, psychopathic inmate that was locked away before the Cataclysm by our very own Noah Hedges. Escaping the prison indeed was a challenge for the Wendigo, yet this was no regular survivor. He is a wood, after all, which we'll come to learn a little bit more about down the line. But yes, before the Cataclysm, Elliot was a prolific serial killer, and that much didn't change when the world ended. There were just less people to stop him. Escaping the prison, Elliot left an inferno in his wake. He would not be held captive. Not ever again. And no doubt he was surprised to see the state of the world once he got out there. Yet it's one that he quickly adapted to. He very easily made friends with other survivors. Survivors who would eventually become dinner. But all this while, Elliot was suffering from something. His body was changing, mutating over time. Some of those changes made him stronger, while others brought him weakness. And then there was the very nature of his mind, which had been shattered, perhaps never really truly being sane. The Cataclysm would only make things worse. He battled with hallucinations, insomnia, and incredibly detailed dreams about other places, other times, and other people. He tried to keep them at bay as best he could with whatever substance he could find, and for a while it worked. In the end, Elliot survived for 55 episodes. Towards the end, he had an incredibly close brush with death. Yet he came off the victor, feeling like he was immortal, untouchable. He smoked a cigar to celebrate. And while he was tired, exhausted even, he was determined to push on, to go further. And so, hopping into a vehicle, he did just that, taking to the roads late at night, narrowly missing some mines. At the time, he wasn't even feeling tired, yet a chemical imbalance in his body sometimes made him fall asleep, a symptom close to narcolepsy. While he was in that vehicle, warm and safe from the outside elements, his vehicle plowed head-on into a boulder, killing him instantly. Or so we might have thought. But that brought the end of Elliot the Wendigo Wood, a monster in his life, destined to be remembered by none in his death. Much of who he was before he became the Wendigo was a mystery to him. He didn't know that person, and neither did we. And for good reason. They don't want us to know. And while Elliot lay there, in those dying moments, his mind stretched out, reached out to a mind of another. A mind that was similar to his own, but one that was not broken. It was a mind that was intact. It was a mind that felt fear. It was the mind of our next character. In February of 2017, we were introduced for the first time to Dusk, the twin of Elliot, and a twin that had led a very, very different life from Elliot. Dusk suffered the same genetic ailment that he did, an ailment that would cause their bodies to shift and change over time. Their DNA was unstable, yet Dusk's genome was more robust. The changes that she would undergo would more often than not be positive. Dusk was a successful test subject, while Elliot wasn't. Dusk had spent her entire life in a lab. The purpose of her very existence was unknown to her, but this was the only life that she had known. There were workers there that cared for her, that helped raise her. And there was always tests, both physical, mental, and surgical. It wasn't a pleasant life, but in the eyes of the organization that grew her, that created her, she was a success, while her brother, Elliot, was a failure. Elliot was released into the world. And the twins' creators knew what he was capable of. Elliot was a chance to have a field test, so to speak, while Dusk would remain the control test subject. Both of them had been brought into this world by an organization known as Zedra. And while Elliot was busy escaping his prison, Dusk had a prison of her own to escape. The lab in which she had spent her entire life. The people that worked with her, the scientists that studied her, they had changed. Now, shambling undead, she had no option but to try and escape. Thankfully, she wouldn't have to do so alone. While exploring the interior of the darkened lab, she happened upon Candy Shanks, a woman who was a caretaker of Dusk for most of her life, one of the only people in the world that she could truly trust. Together, they would attempt to leave this place for good. But it wouldn't be easy. The lab was locked down. But when has that ever stopped anyone in the apocalypse? After great difficulty, the two finally found freedom. And on the outside, they'd have a chance to survive. And they would, for a good long time. Finding a mansion far on the outskirts of Mount Auburn, Dusk brought together a number of survivors. Over the course of 126 episodes, Dusk went from a scared, lost girl into a mutated super soldier that could stand against great hordes of enemies. There was little that could stop Dusk at this point. She had a drive to be stronger, faster, smarter. She knew that her genes could take it. She was built different, if you will. And out of all the foes that she had faced, there was only one that she was unable to defeat. A creature that lurked deep below a lab, part of the same lab network connected to her own. This creature was a Shoggoth, You had the unstoppable force in the form of Dusk, and the immovable object in the form of this Shoggoth, a creature not from this realm, but one whose psychic influence had been spreading across Mount Auburn. There would be only one way to stop a creature of this kind. It wouldn't be claws, it wouldn't be bullets, it wouldn't even be conventional explosives. No, it would take something much bigger. Nuclear fire. Hacking away into a military silo, Dusk did just that, bringing missiles down upon Mount Auburn, upon the lab that was once her home. Finally satisfied that her past was behind her, dead and buried, quite literally, under pounds of rock, rubble, and snow, she moved on. She left with her new family, survivors that had come to depend on her. And not all survivors out there in the Cataclysm were pleasant, and while infiltrating a stronghold of raiders, something happened. A bright flash in the sky, a light greater and more powerful than the sun itself, a light so bright that Dusk could see her own skeletal frame beneath her flesh. And then she found herself in a place altogether different, yet similar and familiar. And that is Season 2 of Dusk's Tale, which we'll get to in yet a moment. As our next series is set far from the cities, far from Mount Auburn, far away from the tale of Dusk, as we now enter Leif's tale. Leif Bjornsson, before the Cataclysm, was a bushcraft and survival YouTuber. And it would just so happen that while out on a shoot, far in the wilderness, naked and afraid, the Cataclysm took place, and so Leif was stuck out there. No team to come and pick him up. He was to survive as best he could out there in the wilderness with nothing else but his own two hands. Thankfully though, for Leif, he was able to come across some remnants of civilization, litter scattered here and there in the bushes, and a downed helicopter, which certainly helped him get started. As with no clothing, the cold is just as deadly, if not more deadly, than the teeth of the undead. And Leif was with us for 32 episodes. He'd built for himself a place in which he could survive. A modest home, but one that he had built with his own two hands. Ever the survivalist, he'd done it, he'd made it out there. Yet he longed for human connection, he longed for civilization again. And so, on a raft that he had constructed with his own two hands, he set off down a river, hoping to see buildings, hoping to find people still alive out there in the world. However, for Leif, that dream would not be realized. He would meet an untimely death in the jaws of a zombified bull shark. He did all he could to escape, yet there was nothing that could be done. He was consumed, forgotten, just like many others in the Cataclysm. Another death. Leif, we remember you. And that brings us to our Iron Man, Bran Owen, our bionic doctor, a man who fell from grace before the Cataclysm, losing his position as a bionic surgeon. A man who then took his skill, his practice, to the underground. In September 2018, Bran Owen graced our screens for the first time, in the megacity, no less. A city that stretched as far as the eye could see, a city that would pose quite a challenge for any survivor. And Bran, just by himself, was no hero, no man of great fortitude. No, Bran had a brain, and a very, very good one at that. He would seek to improve himself, turn himself into the ultimate being. But he would do so in a different means than Dusk. Instead of mutating, Bran would enhance himself with bionics, CBMs, making himself into that Iron Bran. The megacity posed some pretty massive challenges for him that he would have to overcome. For one, the numbers of the undead and how to manage them. Yet, he found his ways. And over time, he reached that goal. Or at least he got close to it, altering his body more than any other character that we'd seen so far. A plethora of CBMs were stuck into every part of his body, wherever he could, and he became more than human. Yet even that wouldn't be enough to overcome the Cataclysm. But believe me when I tell you that Bran has had more impact on this universe than any other character to date. In episode 89, titled Cascade, Bran Owen started a process that has affected nearly every character in this universe now. There was an incredibly complex machine in this lab that he attempted to interface with, one that would carry out a process known as a resonance cascade. Until this point, there were many worlds that existed within Cataclysm, many layers, some with small differences, small changes between each of them. But now, this resonance cascade would cause them to sandwich, squish together, becoming one. And in so doing, it would change the path, the course of many characters to come. That great big flash of light that Dusk saw in the sky, that was a resonance cascade, which led to, well, events that we'll see soon. Bran was unaware of just how significant this event was. For him, there was a great big flash of light and that was it, nothing else. Big deal. Yet this one action would fundamentally change everything going forwards. And so, how did it end for Bran? Well, by the end of his run, he was nearly untouchable, with a mech of his own and most of his body swapped out from flesh to chrome. But even so, one small mistake is all it takes. And that happened deep within a lab. Discovering a turret in front of him and trying to get out in time, he was unable to. Getting caught up on a cart he was dragging behind him, his torso was torn into by the rounds of a mechanical turret, an unfeeling machine. The damage too severe for Bran to put himself back together again. And it is in that lab that he met his end. But maybe not forever. Never say never. And that leads us into our next series, Magicalism, starring Luna Crowley, a young pyromancer whose grandfather was something of an important magi in the world. And yes, that is correct, it was a world of magic, one that is very different from our own. We had never seen a trace of magic in Cataclysm up until this point, and it's because it existed within a different world. A world like ours, but one that did have magic there, albeit hidden from most of the population. In a horrific accident, Luna's grandfather was turned inside out after trying to teleport to safety, hoping to be able to bring his granddaughter with him. And the reason that that teleportation spell failed and that, well, he was turned inside out is because of that resonance cascade we talked about previously. In that moment, Luna's world was slammed into the main Cataclysm timeline, merging those two planes, those two universes, into one. And in so doing, really well and truly screwing up her grandfather's spell, which then caused him to turn inside out, rather than reaching his destination. Like many of our characters, Luna's goal was survival and power, and she built up a great deal of power in her run. Surviving a total of 39 episodes, she built up a repertoire of spells and magical artifacts, yet a combination of effects would lead to her demise. And ironically, it was a demise by fire. At this stage, Luna had an artifact that would give her more lupine-like features and powers. It had the drawback of limiting her intelligence and her perception, however. And so perhaps a little too recklessly, she sought to remove bandits from her area. The majority of this raid went without a hitch, yet it was a landmine that would end things. An object that ends many runs, but for someone like Luna who had mastered fireballs, to be destroyed by fire was, well, it was a cruel twist of fate. And while up until this point, Luna's tale has been our only experience with magicalism, it will not be the only taste As with all the cataclysmic worlds colliding, we will be experiencing it in our current season of Dusk. And so with that, we move on. And in December of 2019, we began Season 2 of Dusk's Tale. That great big flash in the sky, the resonance cascade, caused her to shift from where she was in that moment into another version of herself. A Dusk very like the one that we knew, but one that was in a place that was similar yet different. Trapped back in a lab again, she would have to escape. Yet, in this lab, she saw things that confirmed some of her suspicions in the past. She saw great, vast vats of beings that looked exactly like her. Some more mutated than the others. None of them perfect. None of them looking exactly like her, but she could tell that they were her in one way or another. Yet all of them seemed dead, deceased, discarded. It was more clear now than ever that she was being grown, designed for some purpose. Yet that purpose had been lost in the Cataclysm. Or so she thought. Throughout Season 2 of Dusk, there were two primary antagonists, the Migos and Hub 01. The Migos were extra-dimensional aliens that had invaded our plane of existence and had captured individuals, but not just anyone. From one of the encampments, she managed to rescue 6 individuals, 6 people that looked different, yet they all shared the exact same birthday. They were the exact same age, they had the exact same blood type as Dusk. Almost as though the Migos were looking for something, searching for someone. Dusk would take these 6 individuals to a place that she had come to call her own, a camp that she called the Woods. Built by herself and those that traveled with her, it was a small town that she hoped would be able to survive through the Cataclysm, that this was their chance to rebuild. And for the most part, Dusk was right. This place was safe, it was secure, and that didn't sit well with Dusk. There were still other dangers out there in the world, great fungal threats that needed to be dealt with. With fire, with flame, she did that. Burning back great swaths of fungal mass, as much as one person could. And through that process, she found other survivors. A bunker, Hub 01. It was a place that she hoped that she would be able to find answers. But to do that, she would have to work for them. And it was the kind of work that put herself and those closest to her in danger. She lost someone very close to her because of this. A bone seer named Bridget Lacroix. A bone seer that had taught Dusk that we, in the Cataclysm, live more than just one life, that there's a song being sung by our very bones, and that we may die and live again throughout this Cataclysm. While we might look different, sound different, the flesh may change, but the bones remain the same. Broken by this loss, Dusk still sought those answers, and she also sought revenge. It turned out that the person that she'd been talking to in the hub all along was a lobotomized man hidden behind a wall. She thought she was talking to an intercom, and in a sense she was, but like I said, someone that had no mind of their own. They were just parroting the same thing again and again. These were not the answers that Dusk sought, and so she would delve deeper. And she did so, making her way deep into Hub 01. And in there she found plenty of people that were capable of going out into the world, of saving the survivors that were out there, yet they remained in this place for some unknown purpose. Seeking revenge, seeking blood, she made her way into the heart of this place, and through the hearts of many that resided there. There were no scientists, no civilians, only soldiers. They fought until their last breath, and upon finding the commanding officer, Dusk dueled him to within an inch of his life, and then left him with a bandage should he choose to save himself. Strangely enough, that commanding officer didn't want to see Dusk dead, not even after the destruction she had wrought. She left, and she sought answers elsewhere. Strangely enough, finding yet another that called themselves Bridget Lacroix in the process. It seemed that there was a measure of truth to what she had said, and, as we know, two Bridgets existing within this one reality is, yet again, due to the actions of Bran Owen. Together with Bridget, Dusk would finally find some of the answers that she had been searching for, although I imagine part of her regrets knowing. She found other versions of herself, much like those that she had seen in the lab where this season had begun, yet they were far more twisted than anything she had seen. The process of mutation had pushed them into true abominations. Where she could, Dusk offered them mercy, yet she couldn't bring herself to dispatch them all these versions of her. These versions, they were not caused by the cascade, they were grown. Zedra were trying to perfect something, a weapon. She learned of a project that Zedra were operating, one called Project Arius. It involved, firstly, a subject that had been titled Thea Wood, and from her, two other subjects were created, Dusk Wood and Elliot Wood, twins created from the genome of their mother. Their unique genetic structure would give Zedra what they would need to develop all of the wild mutation strains we see throughout Cataclysm. Every vat of mutagenic goo all comes from one source, in this case, Dusk. And so, at the end of this season here, she was unsure if she was even the first. She had seen so many other forms, so many other Dusks. What are the chances that she's the very first one? The one that all the samples were taken from? Well, she knows for certain that the body that she's in right now isn't. She came from another place, and while the bones are hers, the body is not. But at the end of all of that, it didn't matter to Dusk. She was who she was. She knew who she was. It didn't matter whether or not she was the first, or if she was just another copy. She was Dusk Wood, and she was okay with that. After all of this, feeling more than a little lost, Dusk moved on with Bridget, traveling north, leaving her township behind, believing in part that her very nature would bring them more danger in time than not being there at all. And while traveling north, she came upon this, a tear in reality leading to a different time, a different place. And on the other side of that tear, she could sense another mind, a mind that she had touched only once before briefly, the mind of her brother. And we'll get back to that again later. And now we move on to our first season of the short survival series. It was a series in which we saw a number of characters trying to overcome a number of very, very difficult scenarios. But it all wasn't for no reason. No, these survivors, they were being observed by something, an outside force, something that was testing them, probing them, trying to understand human nature and our will to survive. At the end of this series, there was a vote as to which character was going to go on into the next series. And that character, as fate would decide it, was Helma Baron. We last saw her recklessly riding towards a Migo encampment after having escaped one at the start of her story, after having lost so many to these horrific creatures. It was then that the observers knew exactly who it was they were looking for. Helma Baron was their test subject. And so it was that she would be hurtled through time and space back thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years into a past, a time before humans walked the earth, the time of the dinosaurs. And it was in that world that Helma Baron would have to survive, very much like Leif, with nothing, but with the added difficulty that there is no civilization whatsoever. This was in a woods. From the ground up, literally the ground up, Helma constructed a life for her at the dawn of time. And just like Dusk, she created a place not just for her, but for other survivors, other people that seem to have also been pulled back through time, and that had been imprisoned here by the Migos. But of course, the Migos weren't the only observers. There was someone else here, a man that we simply knew as Winslow, that had been watching over Helma, observing her, studying her from a distance. Through his communication logs, it seemed like he was communicating with the future. He was here in the past, yet he was able to send messages through time, through space, to someone else on the other side. He seemed convinced that Helma was the person that they had been searching for. In time, he would call her Thea. And yes, that is the very same Thea from Project Arius. Here, at the dawn of time, they were searching for her. They knew the interest that their enemies had in Helma, especially hiding her away here at the dawn of time. Yet Winslow would have to be careful with his approach. Helma was incredibly capable. She would not be easily caught off guard. And 113 episodes later, we reached our finale, in which Winslow made his move, sending genetic material from Helma Baron into the future, into our present, to Zedra, who would then go on to develop the twins, Elliot and Dusk, from that sample, from their mother, Helma Baron. And Helma's story would not end here either. She would fight for freedom, killing Winslow and reaching the outside again. But it was there outside that the others would find her, whisking her away to an unknown fate. We then move on to our second short survival series. This group of survivors, however, aren't being observed by some outside force. They're just trying to get by. They're just trying to make it in the Cataclysm. Not an easy thing to do. However, at the end of their journey, two characters would be shifted into the future, and perhaps even more, as Aftershock is currently ongoing. First, Carmen would make the jump into the future, into a frozen world. She would then be followed by General May Crockett, Salus 4, a mining colony, an ice world from a universe in which the Cataclysm didn't occur until far later in humanity's history. Yet, right now, in our current Cataclysm universe, that planet exists, along with more than likely countless others, drifting in space, caught up in the Cataclysm. And that, Legionnaires, brings us up to date. Now, I'm sure you still have many questions. Feel free to ask them here and I will answer as many as I possibly can. You're now ready to start Season 3 of Dusk's Tale with advanced knowledge of everything that has occurred in the past. And yeah, no doubt I have forgotten some details for sure. So if you have a further interest in this weird and sometimes wacky universe here, check out the comments because no doubt there is going to be more answers there. And so, I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this journey through Cataclysm, through 8 years now worth of content. And believe me, there are still so many stories to be told in the future. And so, as ever, I'd like to thank you all for joining me today. For now, I have been Rycon. You have all been awesome. And until next time, stay tuned.